The room froze in collective disbelief as the final image faded from the massive screen. Conversations died on lips, champagne glasses hovered midair, and a man who had walked onto the stage moments earlier wearing pride now stood exposed, stripped bare by truth. In the glow of Metroville's most prestigious corporate gala, betrayal hung heavy, undeniable, proof of secret meetings, stolen kisses, and a double life finally dragged into the light. A woman stood calmly at the center of the storm, her face unreadable, her silence more powerful than the chaos erupting around her. Careers collapsed in real time, reputations cracked, and the illusion of perfection shattered beyond repair. This was the moment everything changed. The night control lost its grip and truth took the microphone. But this reckoning did not begin here. It was born in quiet rooms, sweet promises, whispered prayers, and love that slowly learned how to wound. Before the applause turned to shock and victory to ruin, there was a story still unfolding, layered with devotion, deception, endurance, and faith. So sit back, relax, and allow yourself to be drawn into this gripping and remarkable journey as we return to the beginning and unravel how it all came to be. Metroville breathed like a living thing in those early days, its mornings loud with honking taxis, its afternoons perfumed with street coffee and ambition, its nights glowing like a necklace of restless stars. It was a city that rewarded hustle and punished hesitation, and Nicole lived in it as though she had been born with its rhythm in her blood. She woke before the sun, dressed with quiet elegance, and stepped into the world with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. At Briarstone Realty, her name carried weight. Deals closed faster when she entered the room, not because she raised her voice, but because her calm certainty spoke louder than noise. Colleagues admired her discipline. Clients trusted her instinct. She had worked her way up brick by brick, refusing shortcuts, believing deeply that diligence was its own reward. Sandra, her only sister, often teased her about working too hard, saying life was more than contracts and commissions. Nicole would laugh and reply that purpose was a kind of joy too. On weekends, she volunteered at church events, sat in the front pew, and listened attentively as scriptures were read. One verse had settled into her heart like a promise she carried everywhere. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established, from Proverbs 16, verse 3. She believed it with the whole of her chest. In those days, her prayers were simple and hopeful, gratitude-filled whispers at night, asking God only for guidance, not rescue. Love was not something she chased. She trusted it would arrive in due season, like rain after heat. Metroville, for all its chaos, felt safe to her then. She walked its streets freely, laughed loudly with friends, and dreamed boldly without apology. She had no idea that while she was building her future carefully, somewhere within the same city, a man was learning how to dismantle another person's life with a smile and a promise. Michael entered her life the way a sudden storm enters a calm afternoon, unexpected, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. They met at a high-profile networking gala held in one of Metroville's glass-walled event centers, where wealth clinked glasses and ambition wore tailored suits. Michael was impossible not to notice. He stood tall, dressed sharply, confidence dripping from him like expensive cologne. He spoke with authority, the kind that made people lean in unconsciously, and he carried himself as though the ground beneath him existed solely to support his steps. As a senior figure at Wellington and Co-Architects, his reputation preceded him. People called him brilliant, driven, unstoppable. Nicole was introduced to him by a mutual acquaintance, and from the first handshake, Michael's eyes lingered too long, assessing, calculating, admiring. He complimented her intelligence, not just her looks, and that alone disarmed her. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on work, faith, ambition, and the madness of Metroville. He told her she was rare, that women like her were hard to find in a city obsessed with appearances. Those words landed softly but deeply, like seeds dropped into fertile soil. Over the following weeks, Michael pursued her with intensity masked as devotion. Morning messages, surprise lunches, evening calls that stretched long into the night, he made her feel chosen. Sandra raised an eyebrow more than once, warning that fire that burns too brightly often consumes itself. Nicole brushed it aside, telling herself that not every man with passion was dangerous. Michael spoke often about love as sacrifice, about how a man should protect what he cherishes. He quoted scripture too, once telling her, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord," from Proverbs 18 verse 22, and Nicole smiled, believing God was smiling with her. She didn't notice how often his compliments were followed by subtle claims of ownership, how his praise sometimes sounded like possession. Love, she thought, required trust. And so she trusted, unaware that trust in the wrong hands can become a rope instead of a bridge. Their courtship moved quickly, like a river after heavy rain. Michael spoke of marriage with certainty, weaving visions of a future where Nicole would never have to worry again. He painted pictures with words, her resting while he provided, her beauty preserved from stress, her life simplified under his care. To Nicole, who had spent years carrying her own burdens, the idea sounded like rest. Michael proposed in grand fashion, under the glittering lights of Metroville's skyline, promising devotion that sounded unbreakable. The wedding followed soon after, elegant and celebrated, attended by colleagues, friends, and church members who smiled and clapped, unaware they were witnessing the opening scene of a tragedy disguised as romance. In the early days of marriage, Michael was attentive, almost tender. He cooked occasionally, prayed aloud before meals, held her hand in public as though afraid she might disappear. He spoke of unity constantly, reminding her that marriage meant becoming one flesh, one mind, one direction. Nicole leaned into that idea, believing closeness was the same as unity. Yet small things began to shift, almost invisibly. Michael questioned her long work hours, suggesting she was tiring herself unnecessarily. He frowned when her phone buzzed too often, asking who needed her so much. When Sandra visited, Michael's smile thinned, his patience shortened. Nicole noticed but excused it, telling herself adjustment took time. She clung to scripture during those moments, especially Ecclesiastes 3. 1. To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. She told herself this was simply a new season, one that required compromise. She prayed quietly at night, asking God to help her be a good wife, unaware that she was already shrinking to fit a space that would never be small enough. By the time the honeymoon glow faded, the balance of their relationship had begun to tilt, though Nicole could not yet name it. Michael's pride, once merely noticeable, had grown into something heavier, something that filled rooms before he did. He spoke often of his achievements, of how hard he worked, of how much pressure he carried. Slowly, subtly, Nicole's accomplishments became footnotes in conversations dominated by him. When she spoke about a successful deal, he nodded distractedly, then redirected the conversation to his own projects. Still, he wrapped his behavior in concern, telling her he admired her, but worried she was doing too much. He reminded her often that Metroville was a city that aged women quickly, that stress left marks no cream could erase. He would touch her face gently and say he wanted to keep her just as she was when they met. Those words sounded affectionate, but they carried an unspoken demand. Nicole felt it, but couldn't explain it. She began praying differently then, not with the lightness of gratitude, but with quiet confusion. "Search me, O God, and know my heart," she whispered one night, echoing Psalm 139, verse 23, wondering if she was the one failing to adjust. Love, she believed, required patience. And patience, she thought, meant endurance. What she didn't know was that endurance without wisdom can turn devotion into self-erasure. In those early days, as Metroville continued to buzz outside their windows, Nicole stood at the threshold of a life she did not yet recognize. It's one where love would slowly be redefined, freedom subtly renamed rebellion, and silence mistaken for peace. The shift did not arrive with thunder. It came like mist, quiet and deceptive, settling over Nicole's life until she barely noticed she was damp and cold. Michael's concern began to sound like wisdom wrapped in silk. One evening, as Metroville's lights blinked awake outside their apartment, he spoke gently about her job, asking why she still stressed herself when he earned enough for both of them. He told her a wife should not be worn thin by deadlines and demanding clients, that her peace mattered more than commissions. His words flowed smoothly, like oil poured over troubled water, and Nicole listened because she loved him and because she trusted that marriage meant shared vision. When she hesitated, he smiled and touched her cheek, saying stress had a way of carving lines into beautiful faces. He said he wanted to protect her from that fate, to keep her glowing the way she was when they met. The suggestion felt flattering and frightening all at once, but fear wore the mask of care, and she mistook it for affection. Days later, after much inner wrestling, Nicole resigned from Briarstone Realty. Her colleagues were shocked. Sandra was furious, but Michael celebrated as though a victory had been won. Nicole told herself it was temporary, a pause, not an ending. Yet when she packed away her work clothes, she felt something inside her fold in on itself, like a wing clipped too early. She prayed that night with uncertainty thick in her throat, remembering the words, "The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought," from Isaiah 58 verse 11. She wanted to believe that surrendering her career was obedience, not loss. But deep within, a quiet voice whispered that something precious had been laid down without God ever asking for it. Once her paycheck disappeared, the household rhythm changed. Michael insisted it made sense for him to handle finances now that he was the sole provider. He spoke of unity and order, saying two captains could not steer one ship. Nicole nodded, though unease crept in like ants through a crack. Her bank cards were kept in a drawer Michael controlled. Her spending required explanations. At first, she laughed it off, joking that she needed to learn budgeting anyway. But soon, every request felt like a petition, every purchase an audition. If she lingered too long at the grocery store, Michael questioned the receipt. If she wanted something unnecessary, like a book or a dress, he reminded her that sacrifice was part of marriage. He said it wasn't control, just responsibility. Nicole tried to convince herself that dependence was partnership wearing a different coat. Yet she noticed how small she felt asking for what used to be hers without permission. When Sandra confronted her, warning that love should never feel like a leash, Nicole defended Michael fiercely. Pride can be stubborn, and no one likes admitting they might be wrong. Late at night, she knelt beside the bed, whispering prayers she barely understood, clinging to Proverbs 3 verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. She wondered if trusting God meant ignoring the knot tightening in her stomach. The irony escaped her then that she was leaning entirely on Michael's understanding, not God's. Isolation followed financial dependence the way shadow follows form. Michael began commenting on Nicole's friends, one by one, calling them distractions, whispering that they envied her marriage. He said Sandra was too opinionated, too intrusive, too eager to plant doubt. When Sandra visited, Michael remained polite but distant, his displeasure filling the room like stale air. Afterward, he complained that Nicole changed when her sister was around, that she became restless and critical. Wanting peace, Nicole reduced visits, silenced calls, told herself family would always understand. Her friends stopped dropping by after repeated cancellations. The walls of her world drew closer without her noticing the movement. Michael framed it all as protection, saying Metroville was full of jealous people and hidden dangers. He wanted her safe, he said, wrapped up in him like a secret. Nicole mistook possession for shelter. On Sundays, she sat alone in church while Michael claimed work obligations. Listening to sermons about love and submission, her heart torn between obedience and unease. One scripture echoed louder than the rest. For where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, from 2 Corinthians 3, verse 17. The word freedom pricked her conscience, but she brushed it aside, telling herself freedom looked different in marriage. Still, loneliness settled in her bones, heavy and persistent, and she found herself talking to God more than to anyone else, because he was the only one who still listened without correcting her. Control soon crept into the most intimate corners of Nicole's life. Michael began commenting on her meals, suggesting lighter portions, fewer indulgences. He spoke of health, but obsessed over appearance, reminding her that attraction needed maintenance. He chose her clothes, preferring shorter dresses and tighter fits, insisting she dress to please him. Makeup became mandatory, not optional. Compliments were conditional. Approval hinged on compliance. If she resisted, he accused her of letting herself go, of taking his love for granted. If she complied, he praised her briefly, like a reward tossed to keep her obedient. The cycle was exhausting, like running on a wheel that never stopped. Michael's insults came sharp and sudden, followed by tearful apologies and declarations of love. He would beg, claiming he was afraid of losing her, threatening to break if she ever left. Those moments trapped Nicole in guilt, because who wants to be responsible for another person's ruin? She blamed herself for his moods, adjusted herself to keep the peace, bending until her spine ached. In her quiet moments, she cried and prayed, pressing her face into pillows so no one would hear. She repeated Psalm 34, verse 17, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears, and delivers them out of all their troubles." Deliverance felt far away, but prayer became her lifeline, thin yet unbroken. She did not yet know how God would answer, only that he was watching while she slowly disappeared, waiting for the moment she would be ready to be found again. The atmosphere in their home shifted the way weather does before a storm, heavy and charged, warning without explaining. Michael's absences grew more frequent, his returns unpredictable. Sometimes he came home unusually cheerful, humming under his breath, other times withdrawn, snapping at the smallest questions. Nicole felt as though she was living with two versions of the same man, neither of whom she fully recognized anymore. The silence between them stretched, thick as fog, broken only by the sound of keys at odd hours or the vibration of a phone quickly muted. She noticed how Michael showered immediately after returning home late, how his clothes were tucked away too carefully, as if hiding evidence rather than tidying up. Her instincts whispered truths her heart was afraid to hear. The scent of perfume became a cruel messenger, arriving before explanations could be formed. It lingered in the air, mocking her, daring her to ask again. When she did, Michael responded with impatience sharpened by accusation, telling her she was letting fear poison her mind. He spoke as though her questions were sins, not symptoms. Nicole began doubting herself, wondering if she was imagining things, if love had simply made her fragile. At church, the sermons about patience and endurance tangled in her thoughts, and she clung to them like life rafts. Yet another verse surfaced often in her quiet moments. When there are many words, sin is unavoidable, but the one who controls his lips is prudent, from Proverbs 10, verse 19. Michael's words were many, elaborate, rehearsed, and Nicole could not escape the feeling that truth required less decoration. Each night she prayed, asking God to steady her heart, to keep her from drowning in suspicion. Still, sleep came fitfully, and when it did, it carried dreams filled with unanswered questions. She felt like a traveler walking in circles, trusting a compass that no longer pointed north. The emotional whiplash became unbearable. Michael's temper flared more often, his insults disguised as jokes or concern. He criticized Nicole's thoughts, her tone, her timing, making her feel as though she was always one misstep away from another argument. Then, as if rehearsed, the apologies followed, tearful, dramatic, overwhelming. He would hold her, trembling, telling her she was his whole world, That fear of losing her made him say things he didn't mean. He painted himself as wounded, fragile, dependent on her presence for survival. Nicole felt trapped in a cycle that spun faster each time, like a wheel greased with guilt. She carried the weight of his emotions as though they were her responsibility, afraid that any boundary might push him over an edge she could not see. Friends were gone, her sister distant, leaving her alone with her doubts and prayers. She often retreated into the bathroom just to breathe, staring at a reflection and barely recognizing the woman looking back. Her eyes seemed older, her smile forced. She whispered scripture under her breath, one line anchoring her when everything else felt unstable. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble, from Psalm 46 verse 1. Yet she struggled to feel that refuge, because trouble slept beside her and wore the face of the man she married. She wondered how love had turned into fear without her noticing, how promises had become weapons. The more Michael denied, the more she questioned herself, until reality felt slippery, unreliable. Still, a quiet resolve began forming deep within her, small but stubborn, like a seed pushing against hard soil. Suspicion, once planted, refused to die. Nicole noticed patterns she could no longer ignore, calls taken in other rooms, laughter that did not include her, sudden trips explained poorly. Her heart ached with the effort of pretending everything was fine. One night, she knelt by the bed long after Michael had fallen asleep, tears soaking into the carpet as she prayed with a desperation she had never known. This was not the polite prayer of routine. It was raw, broken, honest. She asked God to reveal the truth, no matter how painful, because living in uncertainty felt like slow suffocation. She remembered the words, "For nothing is hidden that will not be revealed, nor anything secret that will not be known and come to light," from Luke 8 verse 17, and she clung to them as both comfort and warning. If there was truth buried beneath Michael's lies, she wanted it unearthed. The next days passed with aching slowness, every moment stretched thin by anticipation. Michael's behavior grew more careless, confidence replacing caution, as though he believed his deception complete. Nicole observed quietly, her heart pounding but her expression calm. She was tired of confrontation that led nowhere, tired of arguments that ended with her apologizing for his wrongdoing. Silence became her shield, observation her weapon. She did not yet know how or when the truth would surface, only that God was not a God of confusion. The fog in her mind began to lift, replaced by a fragile clarity that frightened her as much as it strengthened her. The moment that changed everything came unexpectedly, disguised as ordinary routine. Michael stepped into the bathroom one evening, water running loudly, steam filling the air. Nicole sat alone in the bedroom, her thoughts racing, her chest tight. She had never gone through his devices before. It felt like crossing a line she had promised herself she would never approach. Yet something urged her forward, a quiet insistence she could not shake. Her hands trembled as she picked up his iPad, her heart hammering as though it knew what awaited her. She hesitated, whispered a prayer under her breath, then unlocked the screen. What she found shattered the last fragments of denial she held. Messages filled the screen, intimate, careless, detailed, bearing the name Amelia. Recognition hit her instantly. Amelia, the wife of Michael's boss, a woman she had met, smiled with, trusted. Nicole's vision blurred as she scrolled, reading plans, jokes, memories of stolen moments. The truth sat heavy and undeniable, like a verdict read aloud. Her body went cold, then hot, emotions colliding violently within her. She closed the device quietly, her hands steady now in a way that surprised her. When Michael emerged, she lay still, pretending to sleep, her tears silent but endless. Inside her, something broke cleanly, decisively. The confusion was gone, replaced by grief and a growing, unfamiliar strength. She remembered the scripture, "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit," from Psalm 34, verse 18. For the first time in a long while, she believed it fully. The truth had wounded her deeply, but it had also freed her from doubt. And in that painful clarity, Nicole understood that the next chapter of her life would not be written by fear, but by courage. Morning arrived slowly after the night Nicole discovered the truth, creeping in like a reluctant witness. She did not sleep. Rest avoided her as if she carried fire beneath her skin. When dawn finally broke over Metroville, spilling pale light through the curtains, Nicole sat upright on the bed, eyes dry but burning. She had cried until tears no longer came, until sorrow felt wrung out like a soaked cloth. The house was quiet except for Michael's steady breathing, a sound that now stirred nothing but bitterness in her chest. She slipped out of bed and went to the bathroom, staring at her reflection for a long time. The woman looking back at her seemed older, but there was something else there too, something firm, awakened. Nicole washed her face slowly, as though cleansing more than skin. Then she knelt on the cold tile floor, not out of habit, but out of desperation. Her prayer that morning was not polite or rehearsed. It was fierce. She spoke through clenched teeth, telling God everything she had swallowed in silence. She asked for strength, not revenge. She asked for clarity, not chaos. She asked for courage to walk a path she could not yet see. The words of Scripture surfaced unbidden. Be still and know that I am God, from Psalm 46, verse 10. Stillness did not mean weakness, she realized. It meant restraint. She stayed there for a long time until her racing thoughts slowed and her breathing steadied. When she finally stood, she felt hollow but resolved, like a drum pulled tight, ready to sound. Michael left later that morning without noticing the shift in her spirit. Nicole watched him go, her heart aching but steady, knowing the ground beneath her had changed forever. The hours that followed moved with painful slowness, each minute dragging its heels as though reluctant to pass. Nicole went through the motions of the day mechanically, cleaning spaces that did not need cleaning, folding clothes she no longer cared about. Every object in the house felt like evidence of a life built on half-truths. Yet beneath the grief, something deliberate was forming. She replayed the messages she had seen in her mind, not to torture herself, but to remember. Memory, she understood, would be her anchor when doubt tried to creep back in. By afternoon, anger began to simmer, not explosive, but focused, like heat trapped under a lid. She returned to prayer again, this time sitting by the window, watching Metroville pulse outside. Cars moved, people laughed, life continued, indifferent to her heartbreak. She opened her Bible and read slowly, deliberately, letting each word sink in. The Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. From Isaiah 30, verse 18, steadied her shaking resolve. Waiting did not mean doing nothing. It meant moving at the right time. Nicole knew she could not confront Michael recklessly. He had spent years twisting narratives, bending reality to his will. If she rushed, he would deny, deflect, and dismantle her confidence again. So she chose patience, even though it tasted bitter. She planned carefully, like a chess player studying the board several moves ahead. By evening, when Michael returned home acting cheerful and distracted, Nicole met him with practiced calm. Inside, her heart thundered, but her face betrayed nothing. She listened, nodded, asked no questions. That night, she cried silently once more, but the tears no longer blurred her vision. They sharpened it. The next day, Nicole acted on instinct guided by prayer. She revisited the messages on Michael's iPad, documenting everything carefully, hands steady despite the storm inside her. Each screenshot felt like lifting a stone from her chest and placing it somewhere solid. She did not rush. She reviewed dates, names, locations, piecing together the truth like fragments of broken glass forming a complete mirror. When she was done, she sat back, exhausted but certain. The truth was no longer something she carried alone. She prayed again, thanking God for clarity even though it hurt. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you, from Psalm 32, verse 8, echoed in her mind. The idea that God was watching, guiding, softened the edges of her fear. That afternoon, Nicole learned through casual conversation that Michael was expected to travel the next day for work. The destination matched the location mentioned in the messages, a private lounge far from the city center. Her heart pounded, but she did not hesitate. She knew what she had to do. The plan formed quietly, without drama, like a decision that had been waiting for her all along. That night, she packed a small bag, choosing clothes carefully, deliberately. She slept lightly, waking often, but each time she whispered a prayer, steadying herself. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. She was moving forward now, guided not by rage, but by resolve. When morning came, Nicole rose before Michael, her movements silent, purposeful. She dressed plainly, pulling a scarf over her hair and dark shades over her eyes, not out of shame, but strategy. As Michael prepared to leave, she watched him closely, memorizing the man she once loved, now a stranger wearing a familiar face. When he left, she did not cry. She waited a few minutes, then followed, heart pounding, but steps sure. The drive felt surreal, the city giving way to quieter roads, the noise fading into a tense hush. With every mile, Nicole prayed under her breath, asking for strength to witness what she already knew without collapsing. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" From Psalm 27 verse 1 repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. When she arrived at the private lounge, she chose a discreet spot, her body tense with anticipation. Time stretched painfully as she waited, hope and dread wrestling within her. She nearly left once, fear whispering that seeing the truth might break her completely. But prayer held her in place. Then she saw them, Michael and Amelia, entering together, laughing freely, hands intertwined. The sight struck her like a physical blow, yet she did not move. She watched, heart aching, as intimacy unfolded without restraint, confirming every suspicion. When they kissed, openly, carelessly, something inside Nicole finally settled. The last thread of denial snapped cleanly. She lifted her phone and recorded everything, tears sliding down her cheeks, but hands steady. In that moment, pain and purpose merged. She did not confront them. She did not shout. She simply bore witness. When they left unaware, Nicole remained seated for a long time, breathing deeply, letting the weight of reality settle. She whispered one final prayer before standing to leave, not for them, but for herself. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was clear. And clarity she now knew was the first true freedom she had felt in years. The days following Nicole's visit to the private lounge moved like slow-burning coals, hot beneath the surface, but outwardly calm. She returned home that night carrying more than evidence. She carried the weight of certainty. Michael came back later than usual, humming, careless, blind to the quiet shift in the air. Nicole watched him from a distance, noting how easily he slipped into routine, how confidently he wore deception like a second skin. She said little, conserving her strength, choosing silence over confrontation. Silence, she had learned, could be sharper than words when wielded with intention. In the privacy of her thoughts, she replayed the recordings, not out of obsession, but resolve. Every image reminded her why she could not turn back, why pretending would only bury her alive. Prayer became her anchor during those days. She prayed while cooking, while showering, while lying awake at night beside a man who felt like a stranger. She asked God for timing, not impulse, wisdom instead of rage. One scripture stayed close to her heart. He has made everything beautiful in its time, from Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. She believed exposure had a season, and she was determined not to miss it. Then, almost as if on cue, opportunity revealed itself. Michael mentioned casually over dinner that Wellington and Co-Architects was preparing for its annual corporate gala in Metroville, a high-profile event attended by executives, partners, spouses, and influential figures. He spoke proudly of an award he was set to receive, his chest swelling with arrogance. Nicole listened quietly, her heart steady, recognizing the door God had opened. The gala was not just an event, it was a stage. And Michael, unaware, was rehearsing for his own undoing. Preparation became Nicole's quiet ritual. She did not rush. Haste, she knew, would only betray her nerves. Each day, she strengthened herself inwardly, reminding herself why she had chosen this path. Doubt tried to creep in during quiet moments, whispering questions about public shame and consequences. But each time doubt knocked, prayer answered. She remembered the scripture, "The righteous are as bold as a lion," from Proverbs 28 verse 1, and drew courage from it. She organized the evidence carefully, backing it up, ensuring nothing could be erased or dismissed. She practiced what she would say, not to wound, but to reclaim her voice. At night, she stood before the mirror, speaking truths aloud until her voice no longer trembled. She refused to let fear write the final chapter of her story. Meanwhile, Michael grew increasingly self-satisfied, mistaking Nicole's calm for submission. He bragged about the upcoming gala, rehearsing his acceptance speech, oblivious to the storm gathering behind him. Nicole observed him like one studies a stranger, detached yet attentive. She no longer sought his affection or validation. Those debts had been paid with betrayal. Instead, she focused on dignity, reminding herself that composure was power. A gentle answer turns away wrath, from Proverbs 15 verse 1, guided her restraint. She would not scream or flail, she would stand firm. By the time the gala approached, Nicole felt an unfamiliar steadiness settle in her bones. Fear still existed, but it no longer ruled her. She was walking forward, eyes open, heart guarded, trusting that God did not reveal truth only to abandon those brave enough to act on it. The night of the gala arrived draped in elegance. Metroville glittered brighter than usual, streets buzzing with anticipation as luxury cars lined the venue. Inside, chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting light on tailored suits and flowing gowns. Nicole entered alone, her posture straight, her expression composed. She wore confidence like armor, not flashy, but undeniable. Whispers followed her as people recognized Michael's wife, curiosity rippling through the room. Michael stood near the stage, basking in attention, unaware of the reckoning inches away. Emilia sat across the hall, adorned and smiling, her composure practiced. Nicole felt a pang of pain seeing her, but it passed quickly, replaced by resolve. She found her seat, heart pounding, fingers clasped tightly together. When the program began and Michael's name was announced, applause filled the room. He walked onto the stage, pride etched across his face, ready to accept praise he believed he deserved. That was Nicole's cue. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and approached the event coordinator with calm authority. Moments later, the lights dimmed slightly, and the screen behind Michael flickered to life. Gasps rippled through the audience as the video played, clear, undeniable, intimate. Michael froze mid-step, confusion giving way to horror. The room fell silent, shock hanging thick in the air. Faces turned, whispers erupted, and Rowan Harper's expression darkened as he recognized his wife on the screen. Nicole stood still, heart racing, but posture unyielding. At that moment, she felt the weight lift. The truth had spoken for itself. She remembered the scripture, "For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known," from Luke 12 verse 2. Tears threatened, but she held them back. This was not the time to crumble. This was the time to stand. When the screen went dark and the room erupted into stunned murmurs, Nicole stepped forward with a fire in her spine that years of silence had forged. Her voice cut through the hall like shattered glass. She did not shout. She didn't need to. Each word landed heavy, deliberate, merciless. She looked Michael dead in the eye and stripped him bare in front of everyone who had ever applauded him. She called him a coward wrapped in a suit, a man who hid rot behind awards and mistook control for strength. She told him he was not a husband, but a jailer who mistook keys for love, thought starving a woman of freedom made him powerful. She reminded him how he dismantled her life brick by brick, how he took her career with flattery, her money with manipulation, her family with lies, and her voice with fear. She exposed his narcissism without mercy, calling it an addiction to admiration, a hunger so deep it drove him to feed on loyalty while dining on betrayal. She mocked the way he preached virtue while practicing deceit, how he paraded faith when it suited him but lived like truth was optional. She told him his promises were counterfeit currency, shiny, convincing, and utterly worthless when tested. She named his manipulation for what it was: emotional terrorism dressed as romance, threats of self-destruction used as chains, tears deployed like weapons when dominance slipped. She told him he smelled of hypocrisy long before he smelled of another woman's perfume. She described him as a man who feared equals, and therefore caged the woman he married, because her independence reflected his insecurity too clearly. She reminded him that while he played architect at work, he demolished his own home, confusing blueprints with boundaries and mistaking possession for partnership. She did not spare Amelia either, but she kept her eyes fixed on Michael, because this reckoning was his. She told him that sleeping with his boss's wife wasn't passion, it was parasitism, a leeching off proximity to power, a reckless gamble born of entitlement. She said he didn't fall into an affair. He walked into it with his eyes open and his conscience locked in the trunk. She laughed bitterly when he tried to interrupt, silencing him with a single raised hand and a look sharpened by truth. She told him his apologies were rehearsed monologues, his remorse a costume he wore only when caught. She said his love was conditional, transactional, a contract written in disappearing ink that only favored him. She reminded the room how he policed her body while desecrating his vows, how he demanded beauty while practicing ugliness of character, how he starved her spirit, and then wondered why she looked tired. She told him that the world mistook his arrogance for confidence, but she knew better, that confidence builds others while arrogance consumes them. She said he was a man who feared mirrors because they told the truth without permission. Then she leaned closer, her voice low and lethal. She told him he didn't lose her that night, he forfeited her years ago, the moment he chose control over care. She said he would never understand partnership because he only knew ownership, and ownership always ends in loss. She told him the applause he craved would never quiet the emptiness inside him, because applause can't replace character. She declared that she was not his possession, not his project, not his proof of masculinity. She was the woman who survived him. She finished by quoting scripture, her tone unwavering. "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free," from John 8:32. Then she added that tonight the truth had freed her and exposed him. She told him plainly that whatever he built from here on would crumble, because foundations laid on lies always do. She turned away without a backward glance, leaving him standing amid the ruins of his reputation, and the room understood that this was not revenge, it was reckoning. Her next steps surprised everyone. She approached Rowan Harper's table and offered a quiet apology for the public nature of the revelation. Her humility stood in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding behind her. Rowan listened, eyes heavy with betrayal, then nodded slowly, thanking her for honesty. The applause that followed was not celebratory. It was somber, final. Nicole felt a tremor run through her, but she remained standing, grounded by prayer. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still," from Exodus 14 verse 14 echoed in her heart. She walked out of the hall that night alone, but not broken. The air outside felt lighter, freer. She breathed deeply, knowing the road ahead would be difficult, but certain of one thing. She had reclaimed herself. The chapter of silence had closed. The chapter of truth had begun. The days after the gala unfolded like the slow clearing of smoke after a fire, revealing damage that could no longer be denied. Michael tried to reach Nicole repeatedly, calls, messages, voicemails that swung wildly between rage and remorse, but she did not answer. Silence, once forced upon her, had become her chosen boundary. The city of Metroville buzzed with gossip, but Nicole stayed grounded, moving carefully through each day as though relearning how to walk on steady ground. She met with a lawyer, her hands trembling only once before settling, and filed for divorce without theatrics or delay. Signing the papers felt strange, not triumphant, but necessary, like removing a splinter that had festered too long. Michael showed up uninvited once, eyes red, voice frantic, promising change, promising therapy, promising anything that might reopen the door she had closed. Nicole listened briefly, then told him calmly that promises meant nothing to a woman who had already paid the price of believing them. She quoted scripture without raising her voice. "Let your yes be yes, and your no, no," from Matthew 5, verse 37, and told him her no had finally learned how to stand upright. When he left, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply, feeling grief wash over her and then recede. Freedom, she realized, did not arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, like dawn, patient and inevitable. Michael's downfall accelerated quickly once the curtain had been pulled back. Wellington and co-architects wasted no time distancing itself from scandal. His termination became permanent, his professional reputation unraveling like cheap thread. Projects he once led were reassigned, invitations stopped coming, doors he assumed were forever open slammed shut without ceremony. Rowan Harper's silence was louder than confrontation. It communicated finality. Emilia disappeared from public view, retreating into damage control, but Michael had no such refuge. Pride had been his armor, and now it lay shattered at his feet. He wandered Metroville like a ghost haunting his own past, realizing too late that arrogance is a poor substitute for integrity. Meanwhile, Nicole focused inward. She returned to therapy, not because she was broken, but because healing deserved guidance. Each session felt like untangling knots she didn't know she carried, reclaiming parts of herself that had been muted for survival. She prayed differently now, not pleading, but conversing, thanking God for endurance and direction. One verse became her quiet anthem. "He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake," from Psalm 23, verse 3. Restoration was not erasing pain. It was building strength around it. Nicole began to sleep through the night again, the nightmares loosening their grip as peace slowly reclaimed her mind. Reconnecting with Sandra marked another turning point. The reunion was raw, filled with tears and apologies that needed no explanation. Sandra held Nicole tightly, whispering that she never stopped praying, even when calls went unanswered. That knowledge wrapped around Nicole like a blanket, warming places she didn't realize had gone cold. She began reaching out to old friends, rebuilding bridges with patience and humility. Some connections resumed easily, others required time. Nicole accepted both outcomes without bitterness. She also returned to work, stepping back into the professional world with cautious confidence. Briarstone Realty welcomed her experience, and though she started in a new role, her competence shone through quickly. Negotiating contracts felt familiar, grounding, a reminder that she had always been capable. Each small success stitched her confidence tighter. She volunteered again at church, not out of obligation, but gratitude, sharing her testimony privately with women who needed encouragement. She never dramatized her pain. She spoke honestly, emphasizing survival over spectacle. Scripture continued to guide her steps. "The Lord is near to all who call upon him, to all who call upon him in truth," from Psalm 145, verse 18, reminded her that she had never been abandoned, even when she felt most alone. Purpose returned gradually, not as ambition, but as alignment, her life finally matching her values. In time, the noise surrounding Michael faded, replaced by the quiet of consequences. He watched from a distance as Nicole rebuilt, realizing too late that control had cost him the very thing he tried to possess. Regret settled heavily on him, but regret without change offered no redemption. Nicole, however, did not look back. She moved forward deliberately, choosing peace daily, understanding that healing was not linear but intentional. Some mornings still carried echoes of the past, but they no longer dictated her steps. She learned to enjoy Metroville again, the laughter, the movement, the sense of possibility that once defined her. She traveled, reconnected with her faith in deeper ways, and learned to trust her discernment. When asked how she survived, she never spoke of strength as something she possessed alone. She spoke of prayer as oxygen, of faith as a compass when logic failed. One verse summed it up for her. "He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives," from Luke 4, verse 18. Nicole understood now that liberty was not given by circumstances, but claimed through truth. Her life did not become perfect, but it became honest. And in that honesty, she found a freedom that no one could ever take from her again. Dear listeners, never mistake control for love, no matter how softly it is packaged. Love does not cage, silence, or slowly erase who you are. Any relationship that demands you abandon your purpose, your voice, your family, your dignity, is not built on care. It is built on fear. Pay attention to patterns, not promises. Sweet words cannot cancel harmful actions, and apologies that repeat without change are warnings, not reassurance. Do not ignore your intuition. It is often the first alarm God places within you. Pray, yes, but also act with wisdom. Faith is not endurance of abuse. Faith is the courage to walk away when truth is revealed. Remember this always. A person who truly loves you will never require you to shrink so they can feel tall. Choose peace over performance, truth over comfort, and self-respect over attachment.